From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Good morning. I'm Dave Parker, MTN's Chief Political Analyst. And, of course, as always, this is Face the State, and I'm joined by our Chief Capital Correspondent, Mike Dennison. And we've been hearing for weeks about the rumors of a certain entrepreneur from Bozeman, Greg Gianforte, running for governor. Well, he announced last week, and now he's in the studio with us today. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, Mike.
So, you're running for governor. What do you want to achieve, and how do you plan to achieve that? What are your dreams for Montana?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for having me on today. I fell in love with Montana 40 years ago, and when I came here as a junior high school student, and we've made our life here. We've raised our 4 kids in Bozeman, and we've shown that we can create high-wage jobs in Montana, and people can prosper here. Yet, Montana's 49th in the country in wages. My dream as a dad and as a parent, I think, is the same as a lot of Montanans. I'd like to see my kids around the dinner table on Sunday afternoon, and I'd like to be able to go to my grandkids' ball games and go to the recitals. I'd like to see a more prosperous Montana that kind of leverages the Montana work ethic, our natural resources, and leadership to create better outcomes for all Montanans.
So, you worked for Right Now Technology. You created this company.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that experience and how that's going to translate into basically making Montana better.
Sure. So, Right Now Technologies was a software company. My wife and I started it in an extra room in our house with no outside capital, right here in Bozeman, Montana. And it's kind of interesting, when we came here originally, people said to us, well, Greg, you can't start a global technology business in a rural state like Montana. And they gave us the reasons. They said, well, you don't have bandwidth, you don't have the capital, you don't have the people. And we said, well, we'll give it a try anyway. And over 15 years, that business grew from that extra room to 1,100 employees, where our average wage in Bozeman was almost $90,000 a year. So I will say we were incredibly blessed with the success we enjoyed. I think we achieved it, and it was really hard. It's not easy. Anybody out there who has started or grown a business knows how hard it is. But we found that when we combined the Montana work ethic with good leadership, almost anything was possible. How does that translate to state government? Well, I think Montana has really boundless potential in terms of creating better outcomes for people. But we also have some problems. We've been losing jobs in the timber industry. We have rich natural resources that have been really constrained by federal overreach. And I really want to focus on bringing leadership to Helena, business leadership, not someone who's grown up inside the system, to push back on this federal overreach so we can do better with our natural resources. As I have been traveling all over the state, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of meetings with small business people in all industries, the most awesome thing about Montana is Montanans, and getting to sit down with them and hear their dreams and aspirations. They don't want their kids to leave the state either, and to find a path forward. Part of that is we need a vibrant private sector. I believe that jobs are only created in the private sector, not by government programs. But as I talk to small business people, they feel they're kind of strangled by regulations. So next month we're going to every corner of the state. We're running a regulation roundup where we're going to sit down with small business people. We're going to wrangle up the regulations that are getting in the way, and the ones that are excessive, when I'm elected governor, we'll put them out to pasture. I also think we've collected too much tax money. We've overcharged the Montana taxpayer. We had a number of tax reduction bills in this last session. They got vetoed by the current administration. I also think the business equipment tax is one of the most regressive taxes we have. We can do better there. I also hear that in state government, because we haven't had a lack of leadership, we have good, hardworking employees at the state government, but in many cases we've adopted a culture of enforcement rather than customer service. I would change that. That's the same thing I did in business. We were in the business of helping large corporations adopt policies of customer service, because truly, government is here to serve the people, not the other way around.
You mentioned taxes, you mentioned regulations, and of course you want to cut both of them. Let's talk about taxes a little bit. I mean, I think for the last 3 decades, we have been cutting taxes in Montana. We've cut business equipment taxes a lot, income taxes, capital gains taxes. Yet here we are, we're still a low-wage state. So why do you think this has been working, and why do you want to continue it?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, Mike. All things being equal, higher taxes reduce employment opportunities. I do know this business equipment tax is particularly regressive. I was with a business person recently. They had invested in a piece of equipment, a large piece of capital equipment. It created 20 high-wage jobs, and yet that business owner is going to have to pay $300,000 on that piece of equipment. They said to me very clearly, if they have to buy another piece of equipment like that, they're going to do it in Wyoming. So lower taxes is not sufficient in and of itself. It's this culture at the state government. Education is really critical too. We have not, Montana has the lowest wages for millennials in the entire country. And as a consequence, we just saw the report this week come out from BBER showing that we export our young college graduates at a higher rate than most states in this country because we don't have opportunities here. An average Montanan college graduate, on average, makes $24,000 less than the national average. I think that's something we need to fix, and we're going to fix it by bringing a connection back to education and jobs. Now, we used computer science people in our business, and those jobs created accounting jobs and sales jobs, and then they created construction jobs and retail and restaurant jobs in the community. But computer science people to us was like seed to a farmer. We don't get the rest of the crop if we don't get the core seed. And yet in 2013, we only had 40 computer science grads in the entire state. That's why we started the Code Montana program, which provided a computer science curriculum to every high school in the state. And I'm proud to say that that private sector effort now has increased enrollment in computer science at MSU by 54%. U of M's up 27, Montana Tech's up 53%. So that's going to create more opportunities. It's also the case, as I talk to construction people, manufacturers, they can't find skilled labor. And we need to help bring this connection between education and jobs back. That's why I'm such a strong proponent for trades education. We started the Gianforte Manufacturing Scholarship. We've now had 287 lower income and veteran Montanans get welding and machining degrees. I was just with a gentleman up in the Flathead, Jameson, who was working retail, having trouble making ends meet. Now he's at a gun manufacturer up there running a machine shop, and he shared with me very clearly he finally sees a light at the end of the tunnel. We need to help people with a hand up to get skills so they can earn higher wages.
That was a long answer about taxes, and kind of went a lot of places there, but I'm sure the business people want to have their taxes cut, and certain people want to have their taxes cut, but if we do that, isn't that going to shift the burden to everybody else in the state, and we need to pay for things that we want government to do?
Yeah, so we have to have a balance, and I'm not talking about just cutting taxes for businesses. We need to cut taxes kind of across the board as we are able. We have almost a $500 million surplus in the state today. This is overpaid taxes by Montanans. I believe firmly if that money was back in the pockets of individual hardworking Montanans, they'd know what to do with it.
As a political scientist, I'm a fan of numbers. So I've heard this number that you've repeated repeatedly last week and today, 49th in wages is what you've been saying. But where's that number come from? Let's start there.
Yeah, so that number is a federal number that comes from its average wage that's been reported over and over again.
So I went and actually looked at the data directly. It's from the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. And the number's actually pretty misleading because it only includes W-2 income or income from salaried people. But we have a lot of small businesses here in Montana. And I know this, I actually went and pulled out my tax returns. My wife was a consultant for many years.
Yeah.
She didn't have any W-2 income. But she's included in that denominator there that they average. They basically take every tax return filed, and they take the W-2 income and they divide it. But so isn't that really a bad number to actually look at our economy here when it's really not reflective?
If you use the numbers that includes passive income from trusts, investment income, and these sorts of things, that's a much higher number. Not everybody in Montana has a trust, though. So I do know that if you look at how many young people are leaving the state because they can't find opportunities there, it's less about the statistics and more about the individual lives that are being affected. We saw this all over. I was up on the High Line in Saco here recently, and they've seen their population continue to dwindle. There's only 44 kids in the public school there, and if we don't find ways to add new economic cylinders on the engine, some of our small rural towns are just going to dry up and blow away, and I don't think anybody wants to see that happen.
I don't disagree with the fact that we need more opportunities, but if you actually look at business income, for example, so ranchers and farmers or consultants, that won't be reported as W-2 income. So my bigger point is this, is that the economy in Montana, in many respects, and other metrics, is really better and has been growing. Is the economy really that bad here in Montana?
So this is a very good conversation to have. We've been riding a wave, a commodities wave. We've seen historically here recently, we've seen a boom in ag commodities that have now fallen off. We've been riding a wave in part because of commodities prices in the energy sector. And the reality is we're seeing softness kind of across the board. We need to prepare ourselves for some more difficult times. We've lost over 500 timber jobs this year in the state. Because of delays in DEQ permits, we've had mines lay off people up in the Bull Mountains and over in Otter Creek. One of the other things I would really want to focus on is bringing some more pragmatic leadership to our various agencies. The Montanore mine up in Libby, it's been 11 years they've been waiting for a permit. And I'm not suggesting we say yes to every mining permit, but I do think that we ought to be able to say yes or no a lot faster than 11 years. And as a result, we need new leadership, not only in the governor's office, but also in these state agencies. And I've made a commitment that if elected governor, I will appoint people from industry into these roles. I think it'd be helpful if, in fact, we had a leader in the Department of Labor who's actually had an employee before. I think people can realize that just makes pragmatic sense. The same thing is true. I'd like to see a landowner in charge of DNRC. And I think when a leader has actually walked in the shoes of the people they're trying to serve, you can make better decisions rather than government insiders or, honestly, environmental extremists that we've seen appointed to many of these positions.
I'd like to switch gears just a little bit here. I mean, you're running against Governor Bullock, we presume, and he's going to point to some things that he had done last time. And I'm kind of curious as to how you stand on some of those things. For example, the Medicaid expansion bill that he touted and signed. Would you have signed that? That came to your desk as governor?
Yeah, well, that's a decision he made during the last session. I do believe, as I've talked to Montanans, there is grave concern about our healthcare system. I come at any problem. I've solved some big problems with a lot of people around the table. We need to improve healthcare in the state. Costs are too high. I don't believe the Medicaid expansion is working. What I think we need to do is look at where we are, however, and identify steps that allow us to increase quality, preserve access in our rural communities, and reduce costs. I think that happens by increasing price transparency, by providing consumer incentives in healthcare, doing additional wellness programs. And the reality is, when I'm in the governor's office, I'll work with the current legislature. We just saw a bill go to the president's desk in Washington this past week to repeal Medicaid expansion. It depends a lot on what happens in Washington. It's not necessarily a decision here, but for me, I would work on behalf of all Montanans to improve what we have. It's not working today.
So you would try to undo the Medicaid expansion if you were governor?
We have a set of law in place today. I would take steps to improve what we have.
Okay.
So let me go back 30,000 feet up for a
Okay.
moment, all right? So explain to me why it makes sense for you to run now against these facts, right? You have an incumbent governor who's reasonably popular. We might quibble on this, we have economic growth. And between 1998 and 2015, 85% of governors running for re-election have won. And usually when they lose, it's because there's a major scandal, the economy's going to the tank, or they just can't campaign. So why now? Isn't the safe bet really in 4 years?
Well, my wife and I have raised our kids here. We love Montana. This is really, for me, a question of service. The fact that we've been near the bottom in wages for a long time, and our kids have been leaving, I personally want my kids around the table on Sunday afternoon. I don't think the policies of this current administration will allow that to happen. And I care too much and want to find a way to give back. We've been incredibly blessed. It was really hard what we accomplished here in Montana. but the prosperity this valley has enjoyed, generating last year almost 40% of all the wage growth in the entire state, I think is a positive step. Montanans are going to have a very clear choice. They're going to have a clear choice between a government insider who has been preserving the status quo, has overcharged the Montana taxpayer, has appointed government insiders to most agencies, versus someone who has spent his entire career creating jobs. And I think that's the core need in the state, to create jobs, to create opportunities. The message I'm taking out to the Montanans has been a message of potential and possibility. And you know what? Montanans are responding. Even before we did our formal launch here recently, in Q4, we received 43% more grassroots support than the current governor did. So Montanans are speaking very loudly that they want new leadership.
Tell me about your leadership style then, all right? You say you want new leadership. How is the Greg Gianforte leadership style better?
Well, it focuses on getting smart people around the table. I tend to be a consensus builder. I'm happy to make a decision when I have to. But in our business, we found that if we did have robust discussions on topics, and then applied common sense, pragmatic approaches, recognizing you can't say yes to everything, that was the way you get good outcomes.
You talked a lot about education earlier, and let's go back to that a little bit. A couple things. One, I'm wondering, you've been a proponent of school choice. Do you think there should be more opportunities, more state support through whatever means for private schools in the state? And also, what about the public school system? Do you think that it's adequately funded as it is now?
Yeah, so in the state of Montana, we spend $12,500 per year per student. You think of a typical classroom that, let's say, has 20 students in it. That's $250,000 that the state of Montana spends per classroom. I think we need, I have no reason to think that that should change dramatically. A typical teacher makes about $50,000 a year, so it does raise the question, where did the other $200,000 go? So I think there's ways we could become more efficient in getting more money to the classroom. I think there are areas in education that we should be spending more. For example, I've been a proponent of getting computer science into every high school. I think that'd be a good thing. I also believe in our rural communities, we need to do more to provide access to AP classes. I think that would require additional investment in the digital academy we have, so that if the next Einstein is born in Baker, they have a good calculus teacher. You know, I think that's the right thing. The goal in education policy for me is that we should be looking at how we help every single child in Montana reach their full potential. The vast majority of students are going to go to public schools. We have good teachers in the public schools. We need to support them well. In our larger communities, however, where there is options in schooling, I think helping parents have more say in how their kids are educated is something that's certainly resonating as I chat with people.
What does that exactly mean in terms of policy? What are you talking about doing?
Well, for example, this last session, that both the House and the Senate passed a tax credit scholarship. Yeah, and I think that's good policy. The governor allowed it to become law. I do think maybe the contribution limit could be a little higher.
$150, yeah, kind of low.
And 23 other states have done this, and every time parents are given more choice in education in a state, academic performance in the public schools goes up. And I think that's directionally correct. We need to fund public schools adequately, and in the larger communities where options are available, we need to make sure that those lower income families in those communities have the options that others enjoy today.
You focus a lot on this notion of high-tech jobs, bringing high-tech jobs to the state. I mean, that's what attracted you, and you think we could get better wage jobs basically because of that. So if we could just pull up this quote here. I want to talk a little bit about a guy named Richard Florida, who's an economist at the University of Toronto, and he knows a lot about urban economics, and he was ranked in 2013 MIT study as the world's most influential thought leader. And here's what he had to say about what he calls the creative class. And he says, regional economic growth is powered by creative people who prefer places that are diverse, tolerant, and open to new ideas. And if you go to the second slide that I have there, he continues in this book, The Creative Class. The bottom line is that citizens need a people climate even more than need a business climate. This means supporting creativity across the board in all of its various facets and dimensions, and building a community that is attractive to creative people. Not just a business climate. So the key here that Florida finds in his book, and a lot of the research studies, tolerance and diversity are absolutely critical. So how, as governor, can you foster this tolerance and diversity when here in Bozeman there was a fight against this local and non-discrimination ordinance? So how can you as governor basically encourage that tolerance and diversity environment, which is just as important as the regulations that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I agree. Discrimination is wrong. When I ran Right Now Technologies, we hired solely based on people's ability and nothing else, and they got promoted based on their contribution. As governor, I would run the state just like we ran our business. People of all backgrounds would have equal opportunity to perform in that environment. I think that's right. There's a big distinction, however, between the governor's recent executive order and the NDO that was passed here in Bozeman. The executive order dealt strictly with state hiring. In my view, I don't agree with the way the governor did the executive order, but I agree with the sentiment of that order. The NDO went much further and added regulations on top of small business. And the challenge we have in the state, as I expressed earlier, is it's sort of like backpacking. Every time you add a new regulation or a new rule, it's another brick in the backpack of the small business owner. And I just don't think we should be adding those regulations.
So you would not support local ordinances, non-discrimination ordinances like the one in Bozeman?
The city commission here in Bozeman requested my input on that, and I provided it, and that's a matter of record. You can look at the emails and see it. I believe we should be focused on creating high-wage jobs in the state and creating opportunities for everybody. And again, when we ran Right Now Technologies, we hired and promoted based on ability and nothing else, and that's the way I'd run the state.
We're getting down toward the end here, so I'll kind of throw several things into one question. There's three things I'd like to ask you about that have happened or may happen where you stand. One is, would you have signed the Flathead Water Tribal Compact? It was before the last legislature. Would you have signed the Campaign Finance Reform Bill, often called the Disclose Act? And three, would you sign a Right to Work bill if it came to your desk as governor?
Mm-hmm. That's a lot packed into one question there, Mike. So, water
yes
compact.
Or no, you can do it.
Yeah. Water compact, it has, I've talked to a lot of people on both sides of it. I've talked to large landowners that are irrigators, that are supporters. I've talked to people that feel their property rights have been confiscated. It passed the House, it passed the Senate, the governor signed it, it's now back in Washington. I think we have to wait for Washington to act on that. In terms of right to work, as I look at the impediments to growing businesses in the state, I don't put private sector unions near the top of the list. It would not be a priority for me that's not where I would focus my energies. And your third one was?
The Disclose Act and Campaign Finance Reform.
Yeah, I'm in favor of transparency in campaigns. I think, you know, recently I released 10 years of my tax returns, kind of unprecedented. I'm an open book, and I think it's important that Montanans have that view into a candidate to understand where they stand and what they've done. And it also demonstrates that we've prospered here in Montana. And that's the core of our message, that prosperity is possible in Montana, and I'll be working for every single Montanan to achieve that.
So you think that organizations that spend money to influence elections should have that information out there about where they're getting their money and where they're spending it?
Well, I think we have to go back to our Constitution and our First Amendment rights about free speech. And the courts have ruled on this in various times. I've made the commitment in terms of transparency and openness to not take any special interest money in my campaign, because I think everybody agrees we just have too many influences here. I want to be representing just Montanans.
Okay, I'm just wondering if you think that we should know about other people spending money, not necessarily you.
Well, I've disclosed all my tax returns and all of our charitable givings on our 990, so I'm on board with you there, Mike.
Okay.
Let's go back to regulations. In your announcement speech, and even here today, right, you basically have blasted the federal government for its attacks on natural resource policy and state sovereignty. Now, I just pulled up an article from Bloomberg, and they wrote in November about, this is what they said about coal.
And that's the ultimate source, right?
Well, Bloomberg's pretty good, right? I mean, they said coal consumption is poised for its biggest decline in history, driven by China's battle against pollution, economic reforms, and efforts to promote renewable energy. And then the New York Times, which maybe is not the ultimate source according to some people, they said the rise of cheap alternatives like natural gas, as well as wind and solar power, have had a far greater effect on coal's fortunes than these regulations. So why are you putting all your eggs on the natural resource basket here? And is it really federal regulations causing coal's demise?
Yeah, well, Montana's a resource-rich state. We have 30% of North America's coal. I'm a free market guy. I believe coal ought to be able to compete with all the other sources of power, and they have to do it on an equal basis. The problem, though, is that these regulations, if fully adopted, we're going to lose 7,000 jobs in the state of Montana. According to the University of Montana, which I take as a reliable source, says everyone's electric bill in the state is going to go up by 16%. And you have to ask, why are we doing that? Well, even the most optimistic advocates for the costly power plant say it's going to give us a 2/100th of a degree improvement in the temperature in the atmosphere, and we're willing to sacrifice 7,000 jobs, while at the same time, 1 year of forest fires in the state of Montana produce over 1,000 years of coal strip carbon. The Beijing skies we had in Montana this past summer were not created by coal strip. They were created by mismanagement of our national forest. So I just think we need to bring a little pragmatic, common sense discussion to the topic. Let coal compete with natural gas. Let it compete with solar. Let it compete with wind. But let it do it on an equal basis without the government putting their finger on it and squashing Montana livelihoods.
You mentioned that study. That was actually not a UM study. I mean, it was paid for by Northwestern Energy and produced by the Bureau of Economic Research. A lot of people have challenged that as not being legitimate. I'm just wondering if you think the Clean Power Plant is actually going to close coal strip, and that's what this was based on. A lot of people think that is not true. And I'm wondering if you're governor, you're going to fight against the Clean Power Plant and not try to comply with it?
Well, we need a clean environment. The economists at University of Montana said, if it does close, we will lose 7,000 high-wage jobs in the state. It'll be a $1.5 billion impact to the economy. It'll increase every single Montanan's electric bill by 16%. Yes, I think that's something we ought to stand up for. And Montana, under this Clean Power Plan, is being asked to reduce the carbon emissions by 47%, more than any other state in the country. We're being singled out unfairly. I would pursue all options to push back. That would include Attorney General Tim Fox's suit against the EPA. It would be putting a logical and forceful argument forward using the facts I'm sharing with you today. It would also include partnering with governors in other states who have similar interests, like Wyoming. I've met with Matt Mead there. I've met with Butch Otter in Idaho. I think there's unity, there's power and unity in pushing back on some of this overreach.
Let's talk about marijuana industry. Brought $70 million to the state coffers in Colorado. That's more money than is collected for alcohol. So you want to create jobs. How about legalization of marijuana? What do you say? Well,
I'm happy to let Colorado run that experiment for a little while. I think we can watch, and I'm not ready to jump in.
I heard you talk about the Hail Mary pass versus the 3 and 5 yard gain.
Yeah.
Can you tell us here in our last few minutes, what are some of the 3 and 5 yard gains you'd like to accomplish in your first year as governor?
In like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I did play football in high school, so I was a lineman, and we won, and we were a championship team. We won not by throwing Hail Marys, because you drop the ball, the other team gets it. Here, I want to run 3 to 5 yard plays. So they'd be things like working to repeal the business equipment tax. This tax simplification bill that was in the last session, I would have signed it. I am an NRA lifetime member. I would have signed the concealed carry law that came to the governor's desk that he vetoed, and I would have signed the other Second Amendment right bill that came to his desk. Yeah. So there's a number of things there.
And well, thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us here on Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.